Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about once again of the great ass whooping that ended up happening yesterday between that of Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. And once again, in my fight review, I have to finally acquiesce that Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, that he is clearly the number one pound for pound fighter. Now, do I still believe that he was ever the clear, undisputed number one pound for pound fighter before this fight? No, because once again, I have to see results. Just like when you talk about NBA basketball, Giannis Antetokounmpo and Nikola Jokic, it looked like they were up next, but it wasn't until they won the NBA championship that they could actually be ranked at that number one spot. And the same thing is recently happening with Terence Bud Crawford, the last undisputed fighter that I think, at least the most recent number one complete undisputed pound for pound fighter, I thought was Canelo Alvarez when he was unifying the 168 pound weight division. And on top of that, he won a light heavyweight title against Sergey Kovalev, making him a four-weight division champion. But of course, that spot, it kind of went off a little bit because Canelo Alvarez, he lost to Dimitri Bivol. And then, of course, he looks like he is slipping a little bit. Had Canelo won that Dimitri Bivol fight, which would have been one of the biggest wins of his career, he still would have a very good debate as the number one pound for pound fighter. But with the performance that Terence Bud Crawford had over Errol Spence Jr., the fact that it wasn't even close, and it was supposed to be his Canelo Golovkin, Ward versus Kovalev, Pacquiao versus Mayweather matchup, all those fights that I just mentioned were more competitive than this fight, and this fight was supposed to be the quote-unquote fight of the decade. Anyways, we're going to review the video by Boxing Ego. It was very clear that Boxing Ego was rooting for Errol Spence heading into this fight, and I didn't disagree with some of the things that he was saying about the Terence Bud Crawford Errol Spence Jr. situation. But Boxing Ego, of course, just like a lot of the LDBC and new media channels, and just most people in general, most people don't have a great logical side, at least in terms of being able to separate their fanboyism and, not being able to commentate on it, or acting on it. But when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about it because Ego, of course, he was hoping that Spence was going to win this fight. But let's see what he has to say. Let's get straight into it. I gotta also say this, just in my personal view, with the level of power that I seen with Terence Bud Crawford yesterday, and I was watching it with my father, and my father predicted Terence Bud Crawford to win. I predicted Spence, but even he was majorly surprised by what happened yesterday. I don't think there was one person, unless you were a Terence Bud Crawford fan or someone that was just predicting Terence to whoop his ass from the get-go, but a lot of us were pretty decently surprised at how this fight ended up turning out. I mean, it was just really a phenomenal performance. But once again, the thing that impressed me the most was just Terence Bud Crawford's level of power. I knew that he was going to bring power to the table, but I didn't think that he was going to look more powerful or basically, pretty much wear Errol Spence Jr. down. If I thought anyone was going to get worn down, I thought it was going to be because Errol Spence's power and his pressure was eventually maybe going to wear down Terence. I thought maybe if Terence wore down Spence, it was going to be the distance game and that he was maybe going to wear him down to the body and then get him a little bit later on. Terence bullied his ass pretty much overall from, rounds 4 to all the way to round 9. Now, of course, he got the knockdown in round 2, but the first 3 rounds are decently competitive. After round 3, the fight was not competitive.
Yeah. Terence Crawford dominates Errol Spence en route to a stoppage in the 9th round. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Wow, wow, wow. Boxing, the theater of the unknown. Congratulations to Terence Bud Crawford. He definitely proved me wrong, and I'm going to break down kind of what I've seen. I'll probably do another video. It's a bit late, but Terence Crawford.
I'll say this. We'll let this ad play out, and then I'll do it.
Crawford he
Anyways, right what I was about to say is that I don't really mind people getting predictions wrong. It happens, but I would prefer someone to usually have a lot of logical evidence behind their fight predictions. And to give credit to Ego, he also had a lot of logical, evidence behind his predictions. He had a lot of logical reasoning. So, once again, I don't mind, certain people that do that. Now, there are certain people that are breakdown artists like Dante, in my view, that they're clearly not the sharpest tools in the shed when it comes down to breaking down a fight. But when it comes to these factors, like I said, I'm not really surprised that Terence Bud Crawford won the fight. I knew that it could have went either way. I'm just surprised with the way that it happened. I could not believe that Terence Bud Crawford, like I said, the way that he was able to move Errol Spence and the way that his power affected him, you would have thought that Terence Bud Crawford, you would have thought it would have been Gennady Golovkin or Canelo Alvarez in his body. I mean, like just the way his power looked. Maybe not Gennady Golovkin level, but like Canelo level. Like it was insane.
stops Errol Spence.
And after that fight, we have to seriously talk about Terence Bud Crawford being the best puncher in all of boxing. I mean, he's up there now with Gervonta Tank Davis. He's up there with almost anybody. I mean, every single punch that Terence Bud Crawford landed over Errol Spence, it looked like it physically hurt him. And Errol Spence is a dude that he hasn't really been pushed back very much in his career. He's always shown an A grade level chin. He's never been knocked down before, and he's fought a multitude of decent punchers. Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, all those other guys, Kell Brook, and none of them, they may have hurt Errol Spence at times. They backed him up. I'm not going to say that I never seen him stunned or hurt necessarily, but they never did it to the same degree that Crawford did. Crawford just, he must have tremendous levels of power.
In the ninth round shows true separation in the fight. I'll take it back from the top. Now, before the fight even started, Terence Crawford, he had very little to say to Jim Gray. He was a man of few words. He looked like just super locked in. Then they did the ring walk. They flipped the coin. Terence Crawford chose to walk out second. So Errol Spence walked out. Everything looked fine. And the one thing people were saying, I seen a lot of people saying that Errol Spence, his eyes looked like heavy or as if he.
Yeah, a lot of people were saying that, and both me and my parents realized that. Listen, what I'm just going to say is this. Errol Spence has always kind of looked like that. A lot of people commentate on him talking slow and his eyes always being half closed. He's just always been like that. But I will say this. The way Errol Spence looked last night and the way that he looked a little bit out of place, like I said, I would not be a little bit surprised if he did a little bit something before the fight just to calm the nerves. Because like I said, when he looked at Terence Bud Crawford, I think he realized what he was getting in the ring with. Like I said, it reminded me a bit of Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov, were two great fighters, but one of them was just on a completely different level of mentality. One was a completely different level of a monster.
Sleepy or just woke up from a nap. But he got in the ring. Then Terence Crawford walks out. And he walks out with Marshall. Yeah, Marshall Mathers, a.k.a. Eminem.
Yeah, that was a sick-ass ring walk. I gotta give him credit.
Nowadays, everybody want to talk like they got something to say, but nothing comes out when they move the lips. Just a bunch of gibberish and act like they forgot about Bud. So I'm a big Eminem fan and hip-hop fan in general, so that was dope to see. It looked like they kind of set this up, the ring walk, from, there was a interview where Terence Crawford said he would love to have Eminem walk him out, and that would be legendary for a fight like this. Eminem said, hey, I'm a big fan of yours too, and they must have made it work behind the scenes. So he walks out. I was surprised Eminem didn't actually rap, though. They just played the song, and he just walked Terence Crawford to the ring, but it could be because it was so impromptu. Then, anyway, Terence Crawford gets in the ring. As far as the fight, round one was a pretty tense fight. It was like a high-speed chess match, and I gave round one to Errol Spence.
I did as well. Once again, I gave Errol Spence Jr. the first round. I also gave him the third round because I thought his pressure was more effective. Every round after that, there was not one round that you could debate even close for Errol Spence Jr. I mean, the fourth round maybe was the last somewhat competitive round. Every round after that, it was just a complete ass whooping.
I thought he was busier throughout the round. Not too much really had happened, but Errol Spence, I think it was busier, and it was like a high-speed chess match. Then you get to round two, which was very competitive, and really you could have gave the round to either guy, but then Towards the end of the round, Terence Crawford caught Errol Spence and knocked him down. And that was almost.
I knew once that knockdown happened, and once again, not to interrupt Ego here, but I like to say things that are on my mind before I forget them. Uh, that knockdown, once that happened, I knew Errol Spence was in deep shit. Because the way that Errol Spence was going to win this fight once again is that he had to really win the first 3 or 4 rounds of this fight. Because Terence is usually a slow starter. Had Terence got a knockdown or won even 2 of those first 4 rounds, Errol Spence was going to be in for a long awakening. And certainly the knockdown I did not expect.
The beginning of the end when Terence Crawford found that, right? So he dropped him. I think it was a 1-2, right? Drop Errol Spence. Automatically, it became a Terence Crawford round, 10-8. And truthfully, when he got knocked down, he was probably embarrassed. Big fight, millions of people watching. I don't know if psychologically Errol Spence never got his head into the game or because something negative happened so early in the fight, it seemed to carry on and set a evil tempo for Errol Spence, and he really couldn't just climb out that hole in that early.
Well, in my view, and it certainly didn't help, but Errol Spence did what he needed to do in that of the third round, because I also gave Errol Spence Jr. the third round. I'd have to watch the fight again to see overall what I scored it, but, Errol was coming back well, but Terence Bud Crawford, once he finally figured out what Errol Spence's game plan was, and when he finally figured out that his jab, it was going to affect Errol Spence Jr., to that level of a degree. Once I seen those jabs landing on Errol Spence and moving him back, pretty much every jab that Terence Bud Crawford was landing, that fight was over. Errol Spence Jr. had to win the jab game in my view. He doesn't have a better jab than Terence Bud Crawford in terms of accuracy, but he had to land his more, or at least do it to the point to where he could trick Terence Bud Crawford that he has just as an effective jab as him, and that he could go to the body and pressure him. Once Terence Bud Crawford was able to back him up and keep him in the mid-range, basically like controlling a dog, that fight was over.
10-8 deficit for whatever reason. In addition, Crawford was doing some great things. What I noticed from Crawford, his jab was on point. Piston.
Absolutely. And I knew it was going to be on point more than likely. I just didn't think that every jab that he was going to land was going to be was going to be that powerful. I mean, it was truly crazy. I mean, he had like a Miguel Cotto power type of jab.
Jab, very athletic, doubling the jab, tripling the jab. And he just kept beating Errol Spence to the punch, jabbing. I think it's worth noting that Terence Crawford entered this fight as a southpaw, which I told you guys he would have to get something done. Even though I picked Errol Spence to win and I was off with my prediction, I told you he would have to get something done as a southpaw and have success because, to me, Crawford really is a southpaw that could fight orthodox.
I agree with that. And he's not the only one to say that. Chronicles of Judo 144, who's also a very good channel, he has said that as well, and I tend to agree. Crawford, he can fight in the right hand stance, but he's a little bit more limited. I said that heading into this fight that Terence would want to fight southpaw, and there's a reason why he didn't even go to the orthodox stance once. He fought at the beginning bell in the southpaw stance, and in my view, that was the correct decision.
His southpaw position, he's a dominant fighter as a southpaw, more so than the other way around. He can fight righty, he can get some things set up, but me personally, I think Terence Crawford is a stronger southpaw, right? But he didn't leave anything to chance, and he came straight out as a southpaw in this particular fight, and he remained a southpaw. So a lot of people were saying, oh, he's going to switch hit and confuse Errol. He didn't need to. He didn't have to switch hit. He came out in the one stance, had success, and just kept picking up the tempo and never had to even think about turning to a right-hander. One of the biggest things that I noticed that was, to me, a key difference that had Crawford looking so great is Crawford's speed, his athleticism.
I agree with that, and I already knew that Terence Bud Crawford was going to be the faster fighter. I already knew that. For those of you that have watched both of these fighters, it's very clear that Terence Bud Crawford has always been the faster of the two. But timing can beat speed and precision beats power. But eventually Errol Spence, not just because of the speed, I knew that the speed combined with the feet, that they were going to be better. But like I said, Errol had to utilize his jab. The problem is that a lot of the times with fighters, when they realize that they're in the ring with a fighter that has a better jab than them, they give up on it. And eventually he had to, because every jab that Terence Bud Crawford was landing, it was almost like it was about to knock him down, at least at certain points. So kind of like the Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder fight, people said, well, why was Deontay Wilder giving up on his jab? It doesn't feel fun to be participating in a jab game where you're basically getting hit every single time that you throw a jab, and that guy can actually hit. And it was the same thing here.
Was on point. His speed and timing, precision and accuracy, unmatched. And he really started and began to bust up Errol Spence, which culminated in round 7 when he dropped Errol Spence twice in one round. And it's crazy. This was an insane performance by Crawford. We've never seen Errol Spence that badly hurt. We've never seen Errol Spence busted up like that. We've never seen Errol Spence get dropped like that. So Bud became the first to become a two-time two-peat undisputed in two weight classes consecutively, 140 and 147. It's been done in women's boxing as far as Clarissa Shields, but she's done everything. Two-time Olympic gold medalist.
Yes, and very great on Clarissa Shields, but no offense, but the women's boxing circuit, let's be real, it's not the most competitive circuit, at least in terms of yet. Now, it is certainly improving with people like Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, and Clarissa Shields getting, on the scene. Michaela Mayer, or whatever the hell her name was, and Alicia Baumgartner. Those girls, they're finally improving the sport a little bit. But let's be real, the Terence Bud Crawford with his 2 undisputed belts, that's the one that actually matters, because he was actually able to do it in a somewhat competitive divisions. I mean, that's really quite impressive.
And she's a multi-time undisputed in multiple divisions or whatnot. So, as a male, Bud became the first to 2x that. Took some shots at the haters. Clearly, he was using that as motivation. People like me who doubted him. People like me who thought Errol Spence was going to win. He had his fun, talked his talk. Can't take anything away from him. It was an awesome performance. It was a great event. The attendance was almost 20,000. This fight ended in the 9th round, where referee Harvey Dock, he seen Errol Spence getting hit with vicious combinations, stumbling, and his legs didn't look fully under him. So,
yes, and I believe that Errol Spence Jr., that he fought the stoppage, or that he did not like the stoppage. Do I agree with the stoppage? Absolutely, I agree with the stoppage. And I haven't seen many fans say that it was an early stoppage, because Errol Spence was getting his ass beat. It wasn't really particularly close. And Terence Bud Crawford, man, like, his level of power was absolutely insane.
The ref has seen enough punishment in the last several rounds and gave Errol as many opportunities as he could to try to recover. But in the 9th, they seen too much. The referee seen too much and decided to call a halt to the bout. Now, for me, despite picking Errol Spence, obviously I was wrong in my fight prediction, but I think the fight pretty much could have been stopped earlier than the 9th round. Crawford was too.
You could possibly debate that. I didn't mind that it went on, but I could also debate that a little bit as well. One could debate that Derek James certainly could have stopped this earlier. Especially after the 7th or the 8th round. One certainly could debate it, but I think both Derek James and Errol Spence said, we're not going to let this dude knock us out. We're at least going to survive to the final bell. But Terence Bud Crawford eventually was so dominant that eventually they had no choice.
Too good.
Or at least the ref had no choice.
Too great, too surgical. The hand speed and the foot speed and just the overall speed of Crawford really was troubling Errol Spence. And what I was noticing from Spence is Crawford has like pretty long arms, plus he's a master at distance and closing distance. And
he certainly is. That was another factor. But the thing that I noticed that both Ego and a lot of these guys are bringing up within these past couple fights about both Crawford and Inoue is that their speed, and don't get me wrong, their speed was certainly a factor, but it was really truly their accuracy when it came down to it, and just their multitude of dimensions, when it came down to it.
And killer instinct. I mean, he's just doing a lot of stuff here. Well, Errol showed immense dog and was like trying to fight back and do things that maybe he's done in other fights with Kell Brook or Sean Porter when it got tougher, or Ugas, but it just wasn't working with Crawford. Crawford was in total control, and he was just dominating the fight. It was really awesome to see. You know, he took away Errol's jab, and that was Errol Spence's like main key to kind of get in. Errol Spence in this fight, it just looked off. He just looked off. It almost looked like somebody else, like an imposter. And sometimes
One could debate that when it comes down to it, but at the end of the day, once again, that happens a lot whenever you get in the ring with a different type of animal. Like many people say that with Deontay Wilder, they're like, "Oh, he looked very different." Well, the reason why he looked very different is because he wasn't in there with the same type of level of boxer. When it comes down to it, it's almost kind of like that, in that of the wild. A leopard, they might be able to take down a gazelle, but they try to take down a wildebeest or they try to take down a Cape buffalo. It's not going to be the same.
that's what happens if a fighter takes away what you're known for. Like, this is a random analogy, but just imagine if a guy, he has a lot of money and he's loaded, and girls and women will date him because they're interested in his money and his cars and his yacht or whatever, right? And he has a nice fancy sports car, a yacht, boat, nice job, mansion, blah blah blah. If that same person doesn't have like game or loses their money, then that's a different proposition because you've taken away his access to why women were dating him, you know? And the same thing for this box.
Listen, what I'm just going to say is this, because Errol Spence looked so dominant in the Yordenis Ugas fight, the only factors that I can really think of, and I'm seeing certain people that are saying the weight drain, I'm not going to go that far because Errol Spence Jr. has been at the 147-pound division for several years. The man is 33 years old, so if you're telling me that all of a sudden right now, at this moment in time, that the weight drain was that severe, I'm just not quite sure if I can go with that. It's possible, but I just don't think that was the main factor. He was off for over a year, so perhaps that did have a little something to do with it. When it came down to it, we've seen Josh Taylor most recently not look himself against Teofimo Lopez when he was off for a little over a year. That could have had something to do with it. But like I said, I'm not one to make excuses when they're off for just a year. So, I've never been one to do that. If there was a factor here, it may have been the year layoff. And on top of that, like I said, if Errol Spence was on something, in my view, it was more than likely his own doing. Certain fighters, when once again, they know that they're getting in the ring with a guy that is truly that level of fighter and dangerous, and they have anxiety issues when it comes down to it. And Errol Spence did seem to me always a little bit more rattled, about facing Crawford than that of vice versa. When it comes down to about Crawford facing Spence, it's possible that he was maybe on something in order to calm the nerves.
Game. If you're known for getting your combinations off set up from the jab and you're slower, and then Crawford was able to take that away and neutralize and nullify that, then it becomes harder and harder for Errol Spence to look like he typically does because his approach or his weapons were taken away. Just an off
When you take away a fighter's jab, that fighter has just lost the fight. Because there's no way that you can win a fight without a jab. At least not usually.
night for Errol Spence. I don't think even the people I seen picking Crawford, majority of them didn't picture this, where it was almost a seemingly effortless performance from Terence Crawford, where he won virtually every round, except for maybe the first round I gave to Errol Spence. But some people may have gave every round to Terence Crawford. That's not out of the question. So I don't know many people who predicted this. I picked wrong. I thought Crawford looked weight drained. I still think he struggled to make the weight. Like, that doesn't really change. But whatever he did in the last 24 hours, he replenished and he came back and he was sharp. He was dialed in and he was focused. Errol Spence, no excuse, but he didn't do himself any services with I don't take tune-ups. You're fighting a guy like Crawford and you didn't take tune-ups, which they both signed on the.
I could agree with that. And listen, just to talk about the potential rematch, or just to talk about the rematch clause, do I see Errol Spence Jr. doing any better? Absolutely not. Once again, for a boxer, especially for MMA, it's a little bit different. But for a boxer to come back after a dominating loss, and win, in the rematch, I've almost never seen it. I've almost never seen it. The first fight had to have been somewhat competitive at the very least. Anthony Joshua versus Usyk is a great example. Fury versus Wilder. I'm trying to think of another one. There might be a couple of others that I'm not personally remembering. But I just very rarely see a rematch that just was nowhere near competitive. And the fighter that lost ends up coming back. I can't really recall anyone. I've just never seen it.
Dotted line. So that's what you got into. Crawford just fought in December, and it showed. He was the sharper, he was the faster, his timing was better. Post fight, Errol Spence was like, oh, my timing was off. And, you know,
Well, the reason why your timing was off, and that's what great boxers do, they make your timing off because they make you do something that you haven't really done before, or they completely change your plan of attack.
I felt bad for Errol Spence at the end of the fight because to me, and I could be wrong on this, but it almost looked like Errol Spence had a concussion. He kind of sounded like, I understand he has a Texas accent and a Southern draw, but it sounded
Well, would you have really felt bad for Terence Bud Crawford or any other fighter that you tried to be biased against? Let's be real, Mr. Ego. Would you have felt bad for them? Maybe you would have. I don't know.
like different than that. And maybe it was because he was deflated or disappointed in the performance, but to me, it kind of sounded eerily similar to when Tim Bradley got hit with hard shots by a big puncher in Ruslan Provodnikov and was just dizzy for most of the fight. And he was having to, even though Bradley won that fight, Errol didn't win this fight. It all
That fight right there against Ruslan Provodnikov that Timothy Bradley had, for those of you that don't remember, that took years off of Timothy Bradley's career. No doubt about it. He still was in good shape after that fight somewhat, but that fight, and Ruslan Provodnikov was never really an A-grade fighter in my view. But Ruslan Provodnikov, man, he put Bradley through hell.
almost seemed like he had a concussion. They should, I don't even know that they should have interviewed him based on the status of his face and how he was sounding. I don't know if Showtime really should have interviewed him and had him at the post-fight press conference. To me, based on the punishment from Crawford, it really seemed like it would have made more sense to just get him checked out at the hospital, make sure everything's cool. But that wasn't my call, so it is what it is. But I personally think they probably could have stopped it a few rounds before they did. They gave Errol Spence, as a unified champion, every opportunity to continue, and he just couldn't get anything going, couldn't get a good rhythm. Terence Crawford had his number. That's the best way to put it. There were like select spots where Errol Spence would try to land big, and at one point he started going to the body, landed some good body shots, things like that. But I think he was so deflated and just flat. He just couldn't get into a rhythm and build any type of momentum. Boxing is a game of ebb and flow, and Crawford controlled the distance with the jab. His speed was really bothering Errol Spence Jr. The knockdown in the second round probably further put Errol Spence in a deficit. And
I agree, but once again, like I said, the main factor, and I brought this up in my fight prediction, if Terrence is actually able to show that he's able to compete with Errol Spence Jr.'s power, and if he's able to push him back and put him in the mid-range, Errol Spence is going to lose the fight. I just didn't think that Terence Bud Crawford's power was going to be to that level of a degree. I mean, I knew that, Terence Bud Crawford had A-level power, but I thought he only had A-level power, and I thought that Errol Spence was going to be an A-plus puncher. Terence Bud Crawford looked like an A++ puncher yesterday. He looked like he had more power in his hands than Errol Spence Jr. And maybe it wasn't that. Maybe it was just that the power was close enough, but he was just a more accurate fighter.
and clouded his mind, and it just wasn't his night. There's nothing else to say. Crawford proved me wrong. I'm eating crow. Paulie Malignaggi and a bunch of other people that picked Errol Spence, we're all eating crow. It was a great performance. For me,
Yes, including myself.
this solidifies Crawford. I still feel like his resume was thin at welterweight. You give him credit
100% agreed. To be honest with you, I thought that his resume was thin, pretty much in every weight division, but it is what it is.
for 35 and 40 undisputed overall. But not now his resume doesn't even matter because you just fought the best guy with the three belts that people said did the heavy lifting. I agree. Errol Spence did the heavy lifting, and it culminated in this one night, and this was a must-win scenario for both. and Crawford won it. So now he's in the history books, a two-time champion, undisputed. Nobody's done that. Andre Ward, Floyd Mayweather, other past greats, Julio Cesar Chavez. No one's done that, especially in the four-belt era. Even though the 40-pound undisputed to me holds a little bit less significance because
I agree with that.
I think welterweight's more stacked. So at the end of the day, this was a surprising performance for me and other fans, even the people who picked Crawford, as I mentioned earlier. I don't know who just came out and said this and like really broke it down. But Crawford,
I agree with that once again, and not to stay on it too much, but my father, who also knows a lot about fighting as well, and competed at one point in time, at least in certain gyms. He even predicted overall that Terence Bud Crawford was going to win, but even he had his his mouth wide open, his jaw dropped to the floor when he seen how dominant Terence Bud Crawford was. I mean, it was crazy.
he has a way, he's like a Tom Brady or somebody where he can use all the pressure and all the angst. Great fighters and athletes like
And I knew that Terence Bud Crawford was going to be able to do that because, like I said, I can just tell by his energy and his mentality. Terence is not a dude that cracks under the pressure. He's just not. And if there was also another factor of what won Terence Bud Crawford this fight, is that once again, Terence Bud Crawford is just a completely different breed of fighter. It is what it is.
Kobe and Floyd Mayweather have been able to channel that and they could go to that dark place. And it's like almost like Crawford is malicious. He heard Boxing Ego make a video saying he was weight drained, probably. He heard that me and other people were picking Errol Spence Jr., and he just went to that place and he wasn't going to be denied. And he wanted to.
Well, certain boxers, and people don't understand this, certain competitors, whether it's boxing or some other guys, but especially fighters, because it's such a primal sport, they get into that mentality almost like a great Alexander the Great or a Genghis Khan, or like that of a Hannibal Barca. Basically, that I'm on a mission to kill you, and I'm not going to be satisfied until I conquer you. And overall, if I have to cause you any amount of pain, if I have to cause you any amount, overall, whatever I have to do to take you down is whatever I'm going to have to do. Certain fighters just think like that. They're conquerors.
Shut me and anybody else who went against him up. And he did a great job of that because I have nothing bad to say. He won the fight. Overall, it was a great event, and I love it because it was a great event. PBC Showtime did a great job promoting. I told you past videos that I thought Errol Spence and also Terence Crawford, even though Bob Arum kicked, threw him under the bus and said Crawford don't really promote. I told you in this promotion, I didn't have no problems with the way or style that Crawford was promoting. He was doing his part. They both went on Mike Tyson podcast. They both went on Gilly's podcast. Errol Spence was on CBS. Bud Crawford, he was making himself available, doing a couple interviews here and there. And he was posting pictures with his videographer and photographers, showing what shape he was in. Obviously, he trained hard. And it was just a successful event. 20,000 people. Steven Espinoza said that the gate is going to be over 20 million. It's a phenomenal success. As far as the performance, I did expect more from Errol Spence. Didn't expect it to be this one-sided. Even if Crawford were to win, it's a 50-50 fight. There's going to be a bunch of people who come out now that we have an outcome and say, hey, I told you, you're so silly. How did you pick Errol and all this stuff? But again, that's the nature of the beast. Comes with the territory.
I agree, and once again, I don't go after somebody for getting a prediction wrong if I think that their breakdown was intelligent, and they brought up several different points as to why they believe that, and they all match up with the conclusive evidence. Now, if you're like a Dante's Boxing Nation, that dude where he claims that, oh, I believe Deontay's going to get him in the third fight because of this cheating bullshit, and, oh, he's improved because overall he just got a new trainer and he's going to improve this massively within 7 months, then I'm like, okay, some of that doesn't make any sense. But overall, once again, if you're a logical commentator, every intelligent commentator, relatively intelligent commentator that I've seen, I don't think any of them expected it to be this this dominant.
50-50 fight. Someone got to win, someone got to lose. And the better man was Terence Crawford. Shout out to Errol Spence, true dog. Wasn't his night. Made no excuses post-fight. He said that, the better man won. He even talked about a rematch. Me personally, I don't know that I need to see a rematch. That's just my honest opinion.
I agree. I definitely don't need to see a rematch. But of course, there was a rematch clause, I believe, for especially Errol Spence. So we'll see.
It's not my decision, but Crawford left no stone unturned and left no doubts. And I don't know that a rematch, even at 54, based on some of the things that I seen, unless Errol Spence had a
That fight is going to be no different. Once again, I just didn't see the weight drain being an issue. And certain people will say that it was a drain. That's what Ego at least was kind of saying right there. And a certain amount of other people said it as well. I think even Devin Haney said it. I'm not really sure if that was a thing. Once again, Errol Spence has been there for several years. And in his past couple fights, I've not seen any major, really even any slight problems with him not being able to fit there anymore. It's just that Terence Crawford, it's just that he was just a lot better than what most of us even thought.
horrible weight cut, which I thought Terence Crawford's weight cut was pretty intense. You know, I don't really know what 54 does different. But again, it's not my decision. That's up to Derek James.
And Jamel Charlo, he better run away from Terence Crawford because Jamel Charlo, first of all, he's got to try to get through Canelo, and I don't see that happening. Not if Canelo shows up in somewhat of good form. If Terence Crawford, man, he's going to have a really rough time because in these next 2 to 3 fights, he has the potential of fighting both Canelo and Terence Crawford. Oof.
And Errol Spence on what they decide to do. They have that option for the rematch.
And more than likely, those 2 fights are going to show you why I don't have Jamel Charlo definitively on my top 10 pound-for-pound list.
So we'll have to see what they decide to do. But I think I seen what I needed to see. And again, barring something crazy that I don't know about, I don't know if a rematch is necessarily different. But you can't put a limit on the human spirit. If Errol Spence feels he has something that he could do significantly different, because he did look very flat in this performance. So if he feels he could switch up mad things and get the victory, so be it. But it is going to be kind of a do or die. Where do you go from here if you lose to Crawford twice? Or
I agree with that 100%. And even after this fight, I don't think Errol Spence is ever going to be the same again. And that also begs the question, where does Errol Spence go from here, as he stated? And on top of that, what does this mean for his career? Well, what this means for his career, in my view, is that I'm not quite sure if he's ever going to be remembered as an all-time great fighter. Unfortunately, he'll make the Hall of Fame, and he'll be remembered as a great fighter for sure. But is he ever going to make that top 20, top 30, even top 50 rankings? I highly doubt it. He's a guy that once again did very well within one weight division, but after this, man, I'm not really sure where he goes from here. Because even if he fights at 154, he may have actually a lot of problems with Jamel Charlo and Brian Cassano now, just the way that he got knocked out.
if it is worse, you know what I mean, in the rematch. So I don't know how that will play out, but I will keep you guys posted on whatever the decision is when it becomes made official. Terence Crawford again proved me wrong. He made me eat my words, and millions of people or thousands or whoever else pick Errol Spence. Amazing performance, put it all together on the given night, and stepped in as an outsider and put Omaha on his back. Omaha, y'all got one. So Letitia Crawford, Terence Crawford, Bo Mack, Bernie, everybody in his corner that was saying I told you so, they have their moment, and they have their moment to talk trash because they did tell us so. Great victory for Crawford. This puts him, I got to put him at number 1 pound for pound. Despite
I agree.
my prediction being wrong, I'm not no hater. I'll give him props. And there's no one really doing what he just did. 2-time undisputed, all knockouts at welterweight, knocked out 2 champions, Jeff Horn, even though I didn't think he beat Pacquiao. The judges.
Well, I already knew he was going to knock out Jeff Horn. I mean, anyone who takes a look at Jeff Horn knew damn well that Jeff Horn was not the real deal. It is what it is.
And he was a champion. He was bigger.
But I will say this. The fact that Terence Crawford has like 10 or 11 straight knockouts, and he knocked out Errol Spence pretty much just as easily as what he did as some of those other fighters, it was pretty impressive.
That was Crawford's first fight at 147. And then Errol Spence, a unified champion that did all the heavy lifting. He came back. Errol Spence looked like he was in shape and couldn't get nothing going. So Crawford got to be number one. Unless you could tell me in the comment section who is doing more, because like even Naoya Inoue, he's a beast. I like Naoya Inoue, but he didn't fight somebody who's number 3, 4, and some people's number 1 on the pound
I would agree with that.
for pound list like
Because Fulton was not on my top 10 pound for pound list.
Errol Spence. He fought a very good fighter in Stephen Fulton, who was a unified champion as well. But Errol Spence was literally on the pound for pound list high up, and Crawford made it look almost easier than some of his other fights with Porter or Mean Machine or Jose Benavidez. So when he gets on Demon Time, it's something else, and it's something to marvel at. Let me know what you guys took away from the fight. Do you want to see the rematch? What are your takeaways from the first fight? Epic fight night, epic event. Really kind of an epic performance, more so than anything else, from Bud Crawford, the 2X undisputed champion. Now at my number 1 pound for pound list. He's making a lot of people eat crow. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know how I did in this video. I did a 4-hour stream, so I'm going to pack it up. And I'm out introducing.
Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that very particularly interesting video. I always like to review Boxing Ego, especially because kind of the best of both worlds in my view. He'll show a certain amount of bias that I think I like to commentate on, but he also has a certain amount of intellectual commentating as well. So he kind of brings both things, I guess. Good for me to review. But anyways, really epic performance by Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. Truly tremendous performance. I mean, at the current moment in time, certainly has to be the number 1 pound for pound fighter. This is up there with almost any fight that was looked at as a 50-50 fight, but ended up being a complete domination. Whether you want to talk about the Fury-Deontay Wilder rematch, Floyd Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez, I'm trying to think of what else. I can't really even think of any other fights. But anyways, very good on Terence Bud Crawford. Very, very, very great performance. No doubt about it. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.